There we go. Happy Friday, everybody. Ooh, I did not like that chat overlay. Hang on a second. That's better. Hey, welcome to our webinar. My name is Logan Evans, CEO. I am of Tabernacle Technology Solutions. I'm joined today by a very special guest. Nicholas, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself, man?
Hi, everyone. I'm Nick Koken. I work for Total as part of the MXDR team, Managed Extended Detection and Response. I come from a background of military and government cybersecurity. Spent some time in the NSA and for a contractor for the Space Force. And now I defend networks just like yours every day.
So for those of you who think I skimped out on guests, I literally got a guy who used to work from the NSA as a guest host. Come on, guys. Give me some credit. I'm just kidding. Hey, Nicholas, it's good to have you, man. Thank you so much for giving us some time today. Title of today's webinar, pretty straightforward: Secure and Profit, Enhancing Startup Value with Cybersecurity Risk Management. Basically, one of the things we want to talk about today, and just to give a quick overview to our audience, cybersecurity matters, not only for risk management, because also for a competitive edge. People who handle cybersecurity properly in their companies, especially in the world of startups, are going to give themselves a competitive edge against their competitors who won't. We'll talk more about that in a brief minute. Nicholas, go ahead and kind of share with us like your daily, obviously you don't go full in detail, but we partner with you guys out in Total. You guys in Denver, you're an awesome partner to us. I think I've been out to your office, had a great time. And we work with you daily. So tell us kind of what the average things that you see during a day in a startup size business, right? Like what kind of threats can they expect to see without getting too far into the weeds? Let's start there.
We see all types of threats. Obviously, the main that we come across almost daily at this point is phishing and business email compromise. End users clicking on links, downloading files, entering in their credentials in a fake login portal, etc. We come across that constantly. But at least once every month, if not once every 2 weeks, I see something quite a bit more severe to a targeted ransomware attack, maybe a distributed denial of service attack, something that is meant to take down an entire business rather than target one user. So, to answer your question, everything from small emails to large, extremely targeted, worked on attacks.
And we're going to talk about that. So let's say today it's going to start off with a very simple premise, which is technology and innovation are absolutely revolutionizing the way businesses operate. They have been for a while. That's no surprise to anyone who's in our audience. They're offering unprecedented opportunities for growth, for scale. I should put disruption in here too, and efficiency. But it's like any opportunity in life. There's always going to be some inherent risks when it's an opportunity that seems almost too good to be true that have to be managed. And I would firmly put cybersecurity risk in that category, right? As we grow, as we innovate, it only seems like cybersecurity risks are getting more and more severe. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely, yes.
Cool. Well, let's talk about cybersecurity risk before we go any further, right? Let's put a definition on it. And this is going to be as dry as this presentation is going to get today. So I have a proper definition of what I would determine cybersecurity risk to be. You can add context if you want, Nicholas. Cybersecurity risk refers to the potential for unauthorized access, use, disclosure, disruption, modification, or destruction of information in a business. It can also entail financial losses, damage to an organization's reputation, and legal repercussions. It's influenced by a firm's use of technology, the nature of its business operations, the strategies in place to safeguard against a range of vulnerabilities and threats. Anything you think I missed in that definition?
I think that covers just about all of it.
I think that's about as like dry as we're going to get here. Like that's almost like a Webster definition is what I was trying to go for there. The rest of this should be more engaging. So when we talk about cybersecurity risk is something that I think is time immemorial, right? We have literally centuries of risk management practices that have been developed and can absolutely be applicable to cybersecurity risk and managing it. Broadly speaking, today we're going to talk about the 5 categories of what's considered the basic methods for risk management. That is avoidance, retention, sharing, transferring, and loss prevention. Basically, preventing or reducing loss prevention and reduction. Sorry, slide deck being slow. We have some screenshots here about startups, and this is a great quote from sifted.edu. And we're going to stop after I read this real quick, but I'm going to read this slide real quick. Actually, I'm going to pull it up on my computer because, Nicholas, as much as I like you, your face is blocking out part of the article, and I don't want to do this.
My fault.
It's all good. Your darn face. Quote from sifted.edu. This is a European magazine. Data breaches are usually associated with big names, huge scandals, and hefty fines. Think Facebook or Google. But startups, too, are regular targets of malicious online activity. In 2020, hackers leaked 1 million customer emails from French crypto startup Ledger. I'm going to pause there for a second. I think we mentioned this yesterday. Hearing those words in 2023 and 2020 crypto startup, like that's a very both sad and nostalgic blast from the past for me. I don't know why, but I get that sense of sad nostalgia every single time. But continuing this, and it's now facing legal action from dozens of those affected. Hackers aren't. Oh, hang on. Yeah, remember to move the slide deck on them. So, yeah. Oh, there it is. This thing's being slow. There we go. Hackers aren't just after sensitive data. Cyber attacks can take different forms, ranging from ransomware, when a company's information or systems are held hostage in exchange for a monetary sum, to cybercrime. Simply tricking somebody into sending money to the wrong person is a form of cybercrime. These attacks target organizations of all sizes, but it is a risk often underestimated by startups who don't see themselves as a prime target for hackers. And this is a quote from VC Paladin Capital Group. Especially in the early days, from 0 to when there are 30, 40, 50 people on board, there isn't much focus on cybersecurity. Another cybersecurity company called DynaRisk recently analyzed the cyber risk profile of the portfolio of companies of 75 leading VC funds in London. They assessed criteria ranging from leaked usernames and password combinations to the reoccurrence of the company's names and hacker groups on the dark web. And it found that 65%, more than one in two portfolio companies showed a high risk of suffering some form of cyber attack. I'm going to pause there for a second, put our faces back up there. When you had a chance to review this beforehand, right? I know you went through it. What were your thoughts when you watched that quote, when you read through that quote?
I really like this quote because, like you said, a lot of startups think they're immune to cyber attacks because maybe they aren't on the first page of Google, maybe they aren't thought of when you think of a company to attack. But in reality, just a few weeks ago, I had a two-person company get attacked with one of the most complex strains of ransomware I've ever seen, and
Two people. Two
two
people.
people,
Wow.
two-person company. Obviously, it is a company that has a lot of cash flow going through it. They have a lot of contracts going with separate companies. However, that two-person company was targeted with an original strain of super complex ransomware.
So
And
what a world we live in then, that someone would take the time to go after two people to the point where you, who usually, I'm gonna fluff your backstory here a little bit, the whole NSA, I work for a security team now, right? You had not seen that before. Like that sounds like it was a lot of work for two people, like from the hacker side of things, broadly speaking. Would you agree with that?
absolutely, going through the amount of encoding in this malware and the amount of work it must have taken. If they designed a tool, it could have taken years to create that tool. If they did this by hand, it would have taken months at minimum.
Do you think AI played a role in that? Maybe some generative AI, like to help speed things along, or is that sort of too far outside the pale at the moment?
Seeing as it could not be decoded with AI, I'm skeptical to think that it was created with AI.
Okay. I was going to ask that because I know that's been a running topic in the security community of what's real and what's not. We'll put
Yeah,
a pin on that particular topic for right now. So yeah, I mean, I'm looking at VC funds, like the just startups in general, right? Like the brand's in flux. Whether you're in private equity or in venture capital, you're building a brand. You're building operations, and especially if you need a lot of runway, if you're a startup that needs a lot of runway, there's a lot of liquid capital held up in there, which could be a pretty attractive target. I mean, what was Facebook famous for saying? Mark Zuckerberg, move fast and break things, right? Like there is a lot of that mentality when you're working in a smaller company, especially a newer one, because you want to grow, you want to hit that ground running. But the problem is when you move fast and you break things, it leaves room for error. And human error is one of the main things that I've seen from my experience that these criminals and hackers seem to rely on to sort of leverage to get their hooks into an organization. Is that still a fair assessment?
absolute. That's the main way that hackers get in. Social engineering, having users click on links, or maybe just the misplaced credential on a website.
So yeah, what can cybersecurity risks inside of a startup or a principal? Say you're a private equity company and one of your portfolio companies are smaller and you just acquire them, right? What can that look like? Let's go ahead and review that real quick, just to give our audience some examples. I would say you could use these three examples as easy to understand ones. Phishing attacks. That's what we described. Someone sends you a realistic looking email of varying degrees of sophistication, and it looks like something you should want to click on or want to do something with or open an attachment on, and they get you to either click on it to put malware on your computer or take you to a forum where they trick you into thinking you're logging into a legitimate website. That's a great example of cybersecurity risk that I think affects every single company in existence that has an email account. I don't think anybody's exempt from that one. Ransomware. Everybody's, I think, at this point, unless they've been living under a rock, have heard of ransomware. That's a fun topic, right? Like the fact that I heard an 80-year-old president say the word ransomware on a press conference, it just tells me how ubiquitous it is, right? I'm like, wow, that's crazy. I remember reading about it in like 2012, thinking this is this cool thing that's locking iPhones. Right now, it's everywhere. It's a type of malware that locks your data in your equipment and the systems that you use, especially if you're in a more traditional IT environment, like proper servers and such, until you pay them a ransom or you figure out how to put things back together from scratch, both of which are painful and take a lot of time. And then last but not least, outdated software can even be a cybersecurity risk. I want to lean on you a little bit here, Nick. Obviously, vulnerabilities are management and that whole concept, right? Like, how often are you seeing outdated software being used as a vehicle for criminals to exploit to sort of enhance their access or get lateral movement? Like, what are you seeing on that?
We over at Total actually had to address this with a specific rule looking for outdated software in order to prevent it because of how much of an attack method it is.
So criminals are actively using this all the time, like just looking for unpatched Adobe, Google Chrome, Zoom. Like they're looking for that and using that as hooks.
Absolutely, and not just Adobe, Google Chrome, and Zoom, not just the mainstream applications. If you think about, I have this mouse right here.
Mhm.
This would install a driver when I plug this mouse in. That
Sure.
driver could have a vulnerability. That's one of the most famous ones. There was a mouse driver that allowed remote access in for threat actors.
I think we talked about this yesterday. Like, and you have to give credit, even though it's like grudging credit, to some of the human ingenuity you see from the attacker side. Like 3 years ago, somebody had the bright idea to buy the top space of sponsored ads on Bing's for Google Chrome, and it was a fake website that would install Google Chrome on your computer, but it also deployed a ton of malware when you did the install. Because what's the one thing when you get Edge that almost everybody did for years? You immediately went to Bing and said Google Chrome,
Yes,
right? Like that was genius. I gotta get. I
super smart.
grudgingly, but I gotta give credit to that. Like I fell for that personally. Like I did. I found the Chrome. Like crap. Now I gotta go figure out what they did. So we're looking at the stats, right? And I love the FBI IC3 report because it's kind of a neat public resource to track sort of general trends over the course of a year. And the 2022 report, I got a chance to look through that in Q1 of this year, and I thought it was pretty interesting. So business email compromise seems to be, to me, one of the main growing threats that you're seeing. You mentioned that earlier, that's getting worse and worse. The amount of data and liability that we have sitting in our email, whether that's just simply it's a great place to send password resets to for our bank accounts, all the way up to, hey, I've got all your vendor information, I've got all your customer information because you've been emailing this stuff back and forth and I can harvest that. Business email compromise has a lot of potential for illicit gain to criminals from my perspective. And the FBI IC3 seems to confirm that because it received almost 22,000 complaints, 21,832, that totaled, and this is the public stuff, right? This is only what's publicly available, more than 2.7 billion in adjusted losses. Like 2.7 billion in losses because you misplaced or lost the password to your email. How does that strike you as a security guy?
I'm not surprised.
Make me feel good.
In fact, I think it's probably double this number because most people do not report it. The
Yeah.
fact that there's 21,832 complaints for the entire year is shocking to me when I see this multiple times a week over here, and we're just one service out of many.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and
I see it all the time, and I obviously, like, I have a different kind of workflow than you do, but the amount of people that come to us and request, like, hey, so my email got hacked. Do I need to be worried about anything? And it's like, what's going on? Well, someone keeps emailing our contractor and saying they need to change the ACH routing payments and stuff. We keep stopping it, but is that a big deal? Yeah, yeah,
yes,
yeah.
absolutely.
Like, sooner or later, they're gonna get it. Get them out
Yep.
of there. Go ahead. Sorry.
I was going to say we see these pretty often where a threat actor gets into an email and they redirect an email chain that is talking about payments for, let's say, a contract.
Mhm.
And then when the email actually comes through with the payment address, let's say it's a PayPal account, a card number, ACH, etc., they will scrape that email, send the same exact one minutes later with changed numbers from a very similar email address. That way, if the client calls the other client, says, hey, this email, did you just send this? Did you mean to send this large account transfer right now? They can confirm, yes, I just sent that 3 minutes ago. They're fast on the gun.
And we're going to go through that a little bit. We're going to talk about commercial gain and kind of like that being a big like driver of why we're seeing such a spike in all this stuff. Like it definitely has shifted from when I was a kid, and I've always been fascinated with hacker culture. It's what started my IT career, and then eventually shifted more into the security side, like the movie Hackers, right? Like classic movie. Yeah, I love that movie. So cheesy and like Hack the World. It's all about creativity, about pushing the boundaries. That's just not what we're seeing from the cultural side anymore at all. It's more about financial gain. It's more about exploitation of information and using that to enhance someone's posture on something. Like that's motivations have just done a complete 180. And I think that's fascinating. We'll talk more about that in a second. I do want to go through this. So I actually, ransomware can't be ignored. The IC3 received publicly, and again, we have to comment that publicly, 2,385 ransomware complaints in 2022 alone. I actually was surprised again that number is not higher, but then I started reading and doing some research on that, and it just seems like they're more efficient on how quickly they get in and who they target. It seems like the ransomware tactics have shifted to be get in, get out as quickly as possible and hit the crown jewels as opposed to going for the widest net as possible. That's what seems to be changing there. Would you agree with that, or am I off on that assessment?
I think you're correct. I also think the number is low compared to the amount that I see. Again, we're just one service.
Yeah.
And many of the ransomwares that we see aren't just single extortion anymore, which was the
Mm.
classic ransomware. It's just locking your systems. Now it's double or triple extortion. If you have a medical clinic and you have your medical records stolen, they can then go offer you either pay the ransom or have lawsuits from every single one of your patients.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the vehicle, like everyone from contractors to doctors to attorneys, that everyone's got data that's valuable nowadays if it's in the right person's hand. I'm going to talk about this one only because I want to talk about MGM for 30 seconds and that whole fiasco. So everybody hopefully heard that MGM Casinos had a pretty bad incident a few months ago of ransomware. One of the biggest casinos in the country, multi-billion-dollar organization, was essentially operations were at worst ground to a halt, at best highly disrupted. Call center fraud cost victims over $1 billion in 2022. That was reported. There were primarily two types of call center fraud identified: tech customer support and government impersonation. Did you see the report? I think this is still alleged. It hasn't been confirmed. Where the criminal gang that supposedly hacked MGM claimed that it all started due to a 10-minute phone call. Did you see that?
I have not personally seen that report, but I totally believe it because I've seen it personally in our networks plenty of times.
Yeah, a lot of people look at me like that's a cyber threat. Like that's been going on since time immemorial. I'm like, yeah, because it works. Like you get the right person on the right phone, you can bypass so many security controls that are in place and get access that you otherwise would never get to. Um, Humans are always the weak link in the chain. It seems like is that's my take on
Yeah, you need the humans to click the yes prompts.
that. Yeah, there's a whole thing. We could go down that rabbit hole. They were on Okta, and I bet I could make some educated hypothesis if that's true how that went down. But we'll stay away from that today. We did see business, professional, and legal services sector, as you mentioned. That seems in Q1 of this year we saw a spike of rising threats that are being publicly reported, upwards of 89%. And we are seeing supply chain stuff. That's basically when for those audience who are watching, you're not necessarily the target in a supply chain attack, but your customers or your vendors might be. And the attacker is using your brand, your authority to leverage access or even your product sometimes. Like I was in your guys' stock when the whole 3CX thing went down. Remember that public event? Yeah, that was not
I
fun.
can't
Sometimes,
forget it.
yeah, like sometimes even just your customers using your product. That's the target. The problem is now you're caught in a chain of being the middleman of a whole bunch of legal liability and red tape. It is a nightmare to be involved in a supply chain attack. I have a buddy who does IR. So like I won't say which company because I think he's under NDA and he shouldn't talk about this, but he works for a big company. And one of the things he does, a huge company, is like over like tens of thousands of employees. And one of the things he does is he's the guy when they have to hostily fire somebody for what they think is like insider threats. So that's corporate espionage. That's potential. They're in a controlled sector. So that's potential like, nation state compromise. Like he does work intimately with the FBI. He's the guy they send to do the forensic cleanup, the imaging, do the diagnostic and put that report together for legal. Right. And he's just telling me that what was the big one that just happened? Shoot, why am I forgetting what was the big 0-day vulnerability that everybody the move it vulnerability? Wow, don't like that. Like the amount of supply chain crap that everybody had to go through because they were just in the supply chain of the move it vulnerability. They weren't even the target; they were just the vehicle that was exploited to take stuff. Like he said, that was when was Move It? Like May of last year? Was that kind of when it kind of came about? Is that right?
Somewhere around there, yeah.
You were talking to me like 2 weeks ago how he's still dealing with stuff like that. And it's like they're paying lawyers at the wazoo and they're trying to figure out what happened. And he's still doing reports. Like stuff like that, just because you're not necessarily the target can absolutely wreck your day. Wreck your year, as it might be. Okay, so we're gonna move here real quick. Give you a story. I like stories. Do you like stories, Nick?
I love stories. My favorite part of the job.
I love stories. So I'm gone ahead and taken a real life story that I dealt with at one point in IR, and I sanitized it. Obviously, we're going to go to the city of Techville. I made sure there was no revealing details, but I want to paint a picture to someone in our audience who said, okay, how does this play out, right? What does a cyber attack look like? Because it's a very fancy word, or it sounds very sinister. It's really not as fancy as you think it is. It can be dead simple, as the story will illustrate. So once upon a time in the bustling city of Techville lived a diligent employee named Sarah. Sarah worked for a small startup firm and was known for being a go-getter and her meticulous attention to detail. Man, I could use a Sarah sometimes. That sounds great. One day, while sipping her morning coffee and going through her emails, She received a message that appeared to be from the founder and CEO, Tom. The email was perfectly crafted in Tom's usual tone and writing style. It read, Sarah, I need you to review this financial report urgently. There seems to be a discrepancy in our accounts. Please check the attached document and get back to me ASAP. The email had an attachment named financial_report.pdf. Sarah, being the diligent employee she was, immediately clicked on the attachment, eager to resolve the issue. However, unbeknownst to her, she had just fallen victim to a sophisticated spear phishing attack powered by generative AI. Okay, you knew AI was going to make an appearance somewhere in here, right? Like, it's 2023. We have to have AI in every webinar. The email was not from Tom, but from a cyber criminal who had used generative AI to mimic Tom's writing style. The AI had been trained on numerous emails and documents leaked on the dark web to create a convincing forgery. The attachment was not a financial report, but a malicious software that now had access to Sarah's computer. That was actually a real, obviously the details were fudged, as I mentioned, but that was a real situation we ran into where it really was just because the employee was such a go-getter and such ready to go, the email was one letter off. And now you've got a full breach because guess who has access to all the sensitive data at the firm? Sarah, as being the primary secretary. She's got everything. And now the criminals do too. And that was a real nightmare to get involved with. Does that story ring true to you? Do you see similar situations exactly what I described, or what's your take on that?
I saw one of those just last week.
Okay, so this is what a real life cyber attack generally looks like when it starts for a startup firm. It's just an email and an attachment. But that email and attachment, I was doing a risk analysis the other day, and like insurance companies have like formulas basically of determining how expensive, forensics, breach coach, IR, disclosure notification are. And this was a firm of like 5 people. And I found, like a single repository that was unsecured of like 500 files of PII, right? And we punch that in. To clean that up, worst case scenario, the insurance company was assuming that would cost $250,000 if that system had gotten breached and that data was leaked because of the disclosure requirements and how expensive it is to do forensics and breach coach. $250,000 for a random repo of 500 files. Kind of illustrates the problem on a business side, doesn't it? I think that does it pretty well.
Yes, yeah. And like we had plenty of time in the military was need to know, having certain people access to certain files. What I see a lot with newer companies is every person has access to all files. So if you compromise one person, you get the entire shared drive, you get all the intellectual property, you get every employee report, etc.
Move fast and break things has downsides too, I think. And I'm not disclosing, I was a startup, right? Like I've done that world. But what I'm trying to get at here, I think, and this is what our key message our audience needs to understand, it doesn't matter whether you're a scrappy bootstrap, whether you're a pre-seed, whether you're preparing an IPO. Like it doesn't matter where you're at in your life cycle of your startup. You are eventually going to be a target for cyber criminals. They're taking the digital equivalent of a shotgun, pointing it at general areas of the internet and spraying pressure. Like that's I'm literally imagining like the Terminator, the scene where like, yo, like, like the shotgun thing, like just that over and over and over every day at just this part of the internet, this part of the internet. And the frequency they're pulling that trigger just means inevitably we're all going to get hit. You were talking to me yesterday, like how many of these phishing emails are getting good enough that if you're not really paying attention, it's like, oh man, I could totally believe that, right? Like it does happen.
Yeah. I've seen some scarily good phishing emails.
I didn't update the slide deck. I think 92.4 we agreed was too aggressive a number when we looked at most recent net metrics. So I will adjust the second one to say 70% plus, everyone. But that being said, these are the security metrics that we're really looking at and saying, hey, this is a real problem and what changed the game for both the money side and the security side. Half of companies lost between 11 to 20% of their client base after a ransomware breach. Long term, you'll probably be okay. I hate to say that. People's attention span's short. But in the short term, if you have a ransomware attack or some kind of security breach and people will get to know about it, I don't know about you, Nick, but there's an immediate reluctance in me to give more of my data, more of my business to that person when they just caught me up in a problem that I didn't want anything to do with. That's
yes,
how
and you know which one the media is going to focus on if it gets out.
Mm-hmm.
They're gonna want to milk that data breach for all they have. That's what everyone's going to be reporting on, not the good things of the company.
And for our audience who are investors or private equity principals or founders, right? Like that is a real load on the asset that is your business, right? Like especially if you're in the right time, like maybe you're going through an acquisition right now, a lot of guys are going through acquisition, or you're looking to like do another round of funding. I feel for you if that's where you're at right now. I really do. Good luck. I wish you all the best. The last thing you need is that PR, right? Like you don't need that kind of thing because it's going to follow you around at least for 6 months, according to the data. 70% plus, as I said before, we're going to amend that thing, I would say, of attacks around 70%. The number can vary depending on who you ask. They start with an email. And I kind of get the logic why, because everybody has an email account. It's just low hanging fruit. We all have it. Nobody can do business in 2023 without an email. So why wouldn't that be the primary target? That's how my brain works. What do you think, Nick?
Yeah, and I think it's also what is easy to access.
Yeah.
The email is going to be something on every website, every LinkedIn, every public post. That's going to have your email. That's going to be the main source where they're going to target a company.
I couldn't agree more. So let's go on because we're going to pushing up. I think we have a hard stop at 1:45. So let's keep going. So reading those stats, there was one stat I wanted to talk about. This one is trot out a lot, and I want to dive into it for a second. I think this is important. 60% of small and medium-sized businesses go out of business within 6 months of a breach. And a lot of people say, well, I don't see that often. The way I see being breached nowadays is sort of similar to the mentality we had in the 60s if someone got cancer. You didn't talk about it. It was something that was very shameful. You didn't want to mention it. And why would you go out of business 60% of the time? It's a lot of load to deal with the fallout of a breach. You got to pay forensics. You got to get a breach coach. You got to pay legal fees for the attorney. You got to go ahead and pay someone to do notification. You got to work with the carrier. You got to assuage customer concerns. So there's PR costs. That is a huge load if you're in the startup space and you're dropping, an unexpected high 6 figures on all this stuff out of pocket. I mean, how much shorter does your runway become? In my mind, if I've done a seed, of $4 million, and all of a sudden my runway has been shortened by a $500,000 incident, that could absolutely devastate me, especially in this climate. I get it. So let's go on to the next slide here. How do you respond to these cyber threats is the question I think every principal needs to be asking themselves right now. Whether you're an investor, whether you're a principal, an investment firm, private equity, or you're a founder, maybe you're the guy driving the charge, right? You need to ask yourself, how are you going to respond to this? Criminals are treating this for the most part like a job. I don't have the stats on the slide deck, but I'm asking Nick. I read a stat somewhere that said like in 2021, 5% of cyber incidents could be, and I know attribution is one of the hardest things to do, but like 5% could roughly be attributed to like nation state stuff. The rest of it seemed to be commercial gain. Does that number still hold up?
Absolutely. Nation state is still very at large because some nations actually create government funding through cybercrime.
Back to the 3CX breach again, I see. All right. Yep. No, but like it's a job. And they treat it as such. And I get it because if you're sitting in, we pick on Russia a lot, allegedly. We pick on Russia a lot here. If you're sitting in a country like Russia, where it's kind of informally understood, allegedly, that A, it is formal. Russia doesn't, for the most part, extradite its citizens for any kind of crime committed abroad. And B, there is allegedly a tacit acknowledgement for a criminal, a cyber criminal, that as long as they don't go after Russian interests, they kind of have a carte blanche on what they can get away with. So what's the downside of targeting a U.S. business and trying to get 100 grand or 200 grand or whatever you want to go for, right? Like there's very little risk for them. So it becomes a real business opportunity. And I love Conti, although I think they've mostly I know they're around still. Like I think they rebranded, but like the stuff when the Ukrainian war started that got leaked from the Ukrainian division of Conti in Russian, where they're like, man, they have bonus structures, they have contractors, they have Hacker of the Month awards. Like this is run like a company. Like it really is a job. So they're treating it like that. It's not hackers anymore. It's not hacker in a hoodie. And we're seeing that play out. We're seeing many startups get caught up in this. And I think a lot of them didn't realize how bad this would be or how much of a target they would be. You need to make decisions, and you have data to make decisions. If you came to me as a startup, Nick, a role player, and you said, "Hey, Logan, come invest in my startup," and that was the first interaction we ever had. I'm gonna go, hold your horses, buddy. First off, who are you? What the heck are you about? Tell me, like you don't have a pitch deck, you don't have anything like that would be dumb, right? I'm not gonna make any kind of decision if that's the way you approach this. Although I think I do know of one guy who did start his company literally with an investor, and that literally was how he started it. And for some dumb reason, it worked out for him. That's fair. Like occasionally you get those outliers, but for the most part, it does work. You need data. You can't make decisions in this regard in a vacuum, especially with such a rapidly growing field of cybercrime. Like it's constantly changing. The last year for me, and I'm not as in the trenches as you are, Nick, obviously, but the big one I've been struggling a lot with is phishing that harvests access credentials from computers. So, if you have a traditional form of MFA, SMS text, TOTP codes, right? And it pre-authorizes your Microsoft or your Google login, right? It doesn't ask you to log in every single time for the most part, depending on what you have your settings set up. It just kind of remembers and sits in the browser. A lot of issues that we've had is, click a phishing email and someone manages to go through some attack vector that can extract that access token, right? And now
Yes.
they've just bypassed MFA. Like they're that whole thing we were told is the big thing. Set of MFA. It's no longer that surefire silver bullet. You have to have what's called phishing resistant MFA in place if you're being modernly proactive.
Yeah.
2 years ago, I wouldn't have known that. Now I'm like, oh yeah, I need to put in, YubiKeys, pass keys. Like we're having those conversations. You have to know that's a thing though before you know to make a business decision around that. Otherwise, why would you? So, Nick, how much when you're doing IR, right? When you're doing IR, the first thing you're going to do, I assume, is you're going to diagnose what the blast radius, right? You're going to figure out what the attack is and how much it impacts. Like, can you take us through sort of your rough methodology of how you guys expose and look at when events happen, how you diagose that? And let's
absolutely, yeah,
minutes or less because we're running on time.
Yeah, sure thing. I can tell you examples from the past. First thing that we want to do is look at what sort of data was touched, what sort of data was taken. Obviously, I'm saying this stage is already after we've shut down the network, covered up the initial intrusion point, kicked out the threat actor, etc. In order to determine the blast radius, we need to look at data. When I was talking about single extortion, double extortion, and triple extortion, data is something that is used in any company. There could be contracts, there could be people's medical records that could be incriminating. Plenty of different items that if they're taken, that's when the blast radius goes from a small firecracker to a nuclear bomb.
And let me ask you another question. So if you could identify the risk exposure proactively, say before the breach, is there moves that a company can do as a business leader to minimize the chances of that blast radius, as you put it, going from being a firecracker to an atomic bomb? Is that a realistic expectation?
Yes, yeah, there's tons of ways. I'm sure you can dive into plenty of them, but just a few examples.
Oh, go ahead, please.
Oh, I was just going to say just a few examples. What I was saying earlier, need to know basis. Don't give one person access to every file on the company. Have people access to just a strict set of your team's files, encrypt zip files with passwords, use rotating credentials, etc. You can go into some more, I'm sure.
Yeah, no, I think that's perfect. And I think the thing you were talking about, right? Like how everyone has access to everything. A lot of founders and a lot of investors have no idea that their portfolio companies are doing that. Like it's just how it natively plays out in live operations, right? Like it's just easy, the path of least resistance. And what happens is you end up with the sprawl of various risk methods and things that you need to be aware of that you have no way of knowing because your team has made that decision in a vacuum or out of ignorance, right? And they didn't know. And now how are you supposed to make decisions when you don't even know where to look for like that risk, right? And my argument to that is when you look at the 5 basic risk methods, right? So avoidance is impossible. I think we can all agree on that based on all available data. You're not going to avoid this risk. It's just not going to happen. I'm sorry. Like you can't do it. I don't care if your stuff's in AWS and Lambda and all the servers. You need to use a computer to go access it. Like I've had people try to make the argument. You're like, I use AWS. I don't have servers. Great. Do you use a laptop to get to that stuff? Yeah. Okay. Well, there we go. Like you have this risk. You can't really share it as much as you might want. I mean, SaaS platforms in general, their terms and conditions, like I was just reading today, 23andMe on Bleeping Computer, updated terms and conditions after it got hacked last month saying, yeah, no, you can't sue us for that stuff, right? Like we're not taking on that liability because how that happened was basically someone on the dark web scraped a bunch of passwords and said, hey, I wonder which one of these will work on 23andMe and just put it in a bot and shop it, right? Like 23andMe was like, nope, that's all you. That's your password. That's your username. We can't be held liable for that. Google and Microsoft have similar things in their terms and conditions. They're not going to share that liability beyond a very limited scope with you. Transferring, I don't want to get into the weeds on cyber insurance right now, but it is a thorny place. The carriers are trying to do the best they can, but they're going to ask you for basic risk mitigation. If you ever go to get cyber insurance, you're going to get 9 times out of 10 a big application with a lot of checkboxes saying, do you have EDR? Do you have vulnerability management? Do you have MDM? Are you actually doing risk assessments? Like they want to kind of have some guarantee that you've minimized the risk, which goes into our last two options. You can either retain the risk or do what the insurance companies want you to do and reduce the risk. And we're going to talk about reducing the risk and how you do that, because retaining the risk, I'm going to be honest with you, not an attractive option. If you're just sitting there hoping for the best, I actually know of like 3 companies on top of my head I can't talk about because of NDA that played that exact card and it didn't end well. I can't go on that one, but it does happen, and putting your head in the sand is not a good viable option. What I would recommend in the 3 minutes we have left, I'm going to blast through this, a cybersecurity risk assessment of some sort. Someone that goes through as an independent eye who knows what they're doing and looks for those broad categories of, hey, this is a risk factor. Here's how you can mitigate it, right? Determines, are you highly likely? Do you have RDP open on your firewall? Great example of that. Please don't turn RDP on your firewall. Is that open? Please leave that off. Going through that stuff. Social engineering the staff. How often do your staff click phishing emails? Like that is a thing that's very valuable to know. Are they susceptible to easily falling for stuff, or are they street savvy? Identifying business assets. You mentioned that before, like learning what you have and where it's stored and what is the most likely, I want to say targeted asset you're going to have to deal with if someone tries to get into your stuff, and how you secure that. That's a big part of this conversation. Our process, Nick, and I know you've looked at the slide deck, but I never actually talked you through it, kind of looks like this. And this is obviously, and I put this up here. If you went through my firm and said, I want to do a security risk assessment, great. I love to do that. Let's do it. How it works is I sit down with the key stakeholders first, right? Identify the priorities of the business. What do you do? What's important to you? What kind of areas of business that you involved in that could potentially equal liability? I'm going to look at what kind of security policies you have. Do you have an IR plan? Do you have a WISP? What business continuity plan? What do you have in place? Or if you don't have anything, probably going to put a tentative one together, like which look like as broad strokes, so you can review when the assessment's done. If you have a physical office, I do like to do physical inspections if I can. I like to know that you're not leaving the door propped open to the front street, right? Like you're in downtown Denver at your office. You don't leave the door propped open usually. Like not a good idea.
No. We have 3 doors. 3.
Three. They're all locked. Say network
Yep.
review. I want to look at the network. I include, for me specifically, also your SaaS topology in that. I want to know what cloud providers you're using for your data repos and warehousing. If you're on Google, if you're on Microsoft, SharePoint, all that stuff. I want to know how the data flows across your network and how devices talk to each other. I want to see how that works. I look at the data, of course, how much PII roughly you have, or any kind of other compromising information that you wouldn't want to get out in the wild. Intellectual property, what makes you you. I had a startup that had a very unique SaaS thing. I wanted to make sure their code repo was locked down. Users and systems, dark web. I want to take a look what's publicly available. And last but not least, I do want to test the team. I usually do that, like a phishing simulation personally. I just want to see if I really take a second, right, and try to like do a little research on the team. A great one I've done is if you use Google Workspace, I'll send you a fake Google password reset email, right? Like I'll do that kind of stuff. If I actually put the barest minimum effort into this, how susceptible is your team to this? Not because I don't think they're ever going to click a phishing email. Everyone's going to click them. I think we've established that. But I want to see, if I put a little effort in and I get half your staff to click, that's kind of a problem, right? Like we expect a certain amount of failure, not a whole lot. So I'm going to go ahead and leave off on this one right here. We do the findings and recommendations in an executive summary. We do a report so you can review it yourself, shop it around if you need to. And obviously a consultation after the executive summary meeting where we're going to go say, hey, this is, what we would recommend. Do you agree, yes or no, based on the data, right? And you can have the educated conversation as a principal of the business, because you're not necessarily a cybersecurity expert if you're dealing with us. So we want to break this down in a way that you can understand and make that educated decision. So for today, we have 2 ways of going about this. So first and foremost, if you want to kick off a full proper risk assessment, and I'm going to go ahead and minimize, you can scan the QR code in the top left-hand corner. That, and also the URL has been streaming at the bottom the whole time. That is our first time appointment. You can talk to us. You can pick our brain if it's needed for you. I don't care. It's free, no obligations. The other thing you can do, I'm going to put this up real quick. If you're not ready for that yet, you just want to take a look and see and evaluate your options, I get it. And one of the things I pride myself, Nick, and most people is I want to work with is I don't do the pushy used car salesman thing. Like that nobody likes that guy for a reason. So what we're going to go ahead and offer to the community is a free ebook. This is a 40-page book on basic cybersecurity risk management principles. It's based on NIST, and you can go through that. It broadly describes how a proper cybersecurity program for any business should look like and what components it should have. If you are heavy into DIY, which a lot of startup founders are, this is the book for you. Like, absolutely, this is the book for you. Nick, I'm at time here, buddy. Thank you so much for hopping on with me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, of course.
This is Nick with Total. Nicholas, you have a very storied background. You offer a great insight. And again, thank you so much, man. Seriously.
Yep. Thanks for having me. I enjoyed it.
Everybody have a great weekend. Stay safe out there. Please take us up at least on the free book. We worked hard on writing that. Please just look at it. And otherwise, have a great weekend. We'll see you next time.